Aquinas' question on the nature and limits of sacred doctrine. Whether besides philosophy any further doctrine is required. And so what he's asking is, by philosophy here, he means knowledge that's attained through reason. So are there any teachings or knowledge that is outside of reason that is necessary for humans? His objection here is not going to be Aquinas' objection, rather it's going to be a statement of one of his opponents who might oppose or reject his ideas. And we're familiar with the straw man argument, which is to put your opponent's arguments in the least favorable light. Aquinas here is going to steel man his opponent's argument, meaning putting them in the strongest, most favorable light before he refutes them. And so his opponent says, it seems that besides the philosophical disciplines, we have no need of any further teaching, for man should not seek to know what is above reason. Seek not the things that are too high for thee. Here he quotes Scripture as an authority against Aquinas, because Aquinas would be a Christian, and so as a Christian he might give heed to Scripture. But whatever is not above reason is fully treated of in the philosophical disciplines. Therefore, any other teaching besides the philosophical disciplines seems superfluous, which is unnecessary. So knowledge outside of reason seems unnecessary, or maybe I'm excited to see what he says about it in Latin. Superfluous seems like a Latin word. We're going to go read Aquinas' reply to that objection. He says, although those things which are beyond man's knowledge may not be sought for by man through his reason, nevertheless, once they are revealed by God, they must be accepted by faith. And so there's certain things, Aquinas is saying, there's certain things that are revelations from God that we could not have gotten to through reason. So the only reason we know them is because they were revealed, and our reason would have been powerless to get there on its own. The most obvious example being Christ being the Son of God. It's not something that opposes reason. It's not something that's contrary to reason, but it's not something you get to by reason alone. It's not something you could derive from reason alone. Nevertheless, it's true. Hence, the sacred text continues, for many things are shown to thee above the understanding of man. And in this, the sacred science consists. So this is interesting, because this is oftentimes in arguments, your opponents will take a quote out of context, and so here he takes the quote that his opponent took out of context, and he reveals the rest of the context. Now let's just go look at that again. He said the context the out of context, seek not things that are too high for thee. So that's in 322. And in let's see where it is. In 325, so it's a couple verses later. Many things are shown to thee above the understanding of man. So that's very interesting. So if you read just parts of the scriptures out of context, you might get certain ideas that would disappear if you read them within context. Okay, second objection. Further, a teaching can be concerned only with being, for nothing can be known save what is true, and all that is true. So teachings have to do with what exists. Makes sense to me. Teachings about non-existence seem to be nonsense. But everything that is treated of in the philosophical disciplines, even God himself. So there is a part of philosophy called theology, or the divine science, as Aristotle has proved. So I'm ignorant in Aristotle, so I haven't read this. But that's like something, I better note that down. Aristotle Metaphysics 6, and they proved that theology is a thing. So I'm going to write that down. Aristotle Metaphysics 6. See what he had to say there. Therefore, besides the philosophical disciplines, there is no need of any further teaching. So let me see if you understand what he's saying. He's saying that, well, even knowledge of God can be derived from reason, and that's so we can use reason to understand God himself. Now, right? It depends on how you define God, is what they say, right? Now, if God is the highest possible being, or the goodest possible being, or the most powerful possible being, right? We can use our reason to try to imagine what the most powerful, or most knowing, or most good being or personage could possibly be. You can understand how we can get there. So if somebody was the most good, then they wouldn't sin, or they choose not to sin, or maybe not even be able to sin. If they were the most powerful, they'd be able to create things and move things around and do things they want to do whenever they wanted to. So we can kind of use reason to understand what a god-like being, or maybe even a god being, could be. And in fact, I think Aristotle and Plato derived an idea of God using pure reason, although Aristotle was unable to reconcile why a God who created the universe would care about humans rather than just seeing us as bugs. So let's see if he's able to respond to the idea that even the study of God is within the realm of reason, which seems like a valid argument, right? It seems like we should be sticking to reason, right? However, Aristotle replies that sciences are differentiated according to the different ways that things are knowable. For the astronomer and the physicist, both may prove the same conclusion. For instance, that the Earth is round. Oh, look at this, Aquinas. Wow. Arguing against the flat earthers in 1200 AD. So that was 800 years ago. He thought the Earth was round. And you heard everybody's in the Middle Ages were flat earthers, but right here is Aquinas. That's really interesting. He thought the Earth was round. Or at least knew the argument. The astronomer, by means of mathematics, i.e., abstracting from matter. So mathematics is an abstraction, right? That's what he says, an abstract science. And the physicist by means of matter itself. So the mathematician uses abstractions to understand reality. The physicist uses matter to understand reality. Hence, nothing prevents those things which may be learned from the philosophical disciplines, so far as they can be known by light of natural reason, from being considered by another science according as they are known by the light of divine revelation. Or is there known? Okay. Hence, theology included in the sacred doctrine differs in kind from that of theology, which is part of philosophy. So it seems like he's saying there's two theologies. And I think once again this is kind of referring to objection number one, and then response number one is that there's kind of revealed doctrine. There's a revealed doctrine, and then there's kind of doctrine known through reason. And revealed doctrine, I think Aquinas is arguing, is not contrary to reason, but maybe cannot be derived by reason alone. And so it doesn't contradict reason, but you can't get there just using pure reason. And what's important to know is this idea of how things are knowable, the ways, not just things that are knowable, but the ways that things are knowable. And an example of this is that science is not the tool to know all things. You do not use the scientific method in math. So if you have, in geometry especially, if you have the Pythagorean theorem, which teaches you about triangles, you don't go around the world trying to find triangles that prove or disprove the Pythagorean theorem. It just doesn't work that way. It's by definition true that triangles work in a certain way, and we understand that by pure reason. We don't use empiricism or the scientific method. And so he's saying theology is like geometry. It's a separate kind of way of, we attain the knowledge. We can use reason to understand it, but we attain some of that knowledge through revelation. Seems to be what he's saying there. Okay, so we did objections 1, objection 2. The on the contrary is going to be an argument from authority that is on the side of Aquinas. So Aquinas is going to argue from authority that he is correct. And of course, since he's talking about Christianity, he's going to refer to Christian authorities. So these arguments might not be very convincing to a non-Christian. And for that reason, I guess maybe we should have started with Aquinas wrote a book against non-Christians, arguing against them. So this book, I guess, is mostly for Christians. But some Christians might not agree with Aquinas. So let's see if he's going to get them into his fold. It's written in 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture, inspired by God, is useful for teaching, for reproving, for correcting, and for instructing in justice. Now, Scripture, inspired by God, does it say that? All Scripture, inspired by God, is no part of the philosophical disciplines. So it's not, that which comes from God is not through reason, through revelation, which were discovered by human reason. The philosophical disciplines were discovered and not created, right? So philosophy, the understanding of the natural world using logic is not just a human fabrication. It has something to do with reality, right? It's a discovery. Therefore, it is useful that besides the philosophical disciplines, there should be another science inspired by God. All right, so that's his argument is that there's Scripture that's inspired. So revelation is a thing, I think is what he's saying. I answered that it was necessary for man's salvation that there should be a teaching revealed by God beyond the philosophical disciplines. Well, that's important, right? Okay. From sin, from hell and death and hell, right? And if you don't believe in hell, well, try getting away with something. And that awful emptiness that you feel is the fires of hell opening up in your soul. First, okay, what's he saying? Necessary for a man's salvation beyond philosophical disciplines. First, indeed, because man is directed to God as to an end means a goal, right? That surpasses the grasp of reason. Now, I'm interested in looking into this, but we are drawn to worship. We are drawn to God, and we might have kind of false or silly conceptions of what God is. Nevertheless, we're drawn towards that, right? Even atheists like Sam Harris meditate and try to clear their minds and try to kind of reach higher, you could say. The eye hath not seen, O God, besides thee, what things thou hast prepared for them that love thee. So the eye hath not seen those things which we know God was going to give to us. We have this inclination of an eternal reward that nobody has seen yet. The end must first be known by men who are to direct their thoughts and actions to the end. Interesting. So a hope for salvation must be known. We must know that there's a possibility of salvation before we start striving for it. Now you could say this is all an imagination. I don't know if I'll cover that later, but we'll have to see. Hence it was necessary for the salvation of man that certain truths which exceed human reason should be made known to him by divine revelation. So if God were to have us seek for him without knowing him through sight, we would have to know him in some other way to know that we should seek for him. Okay, that makes sense. Even as regards to those truths about God which human reason could have discovered, it was necessary, and this is something that Plato and Aristotle both did. It was necessary that man should be taught by divine revelation, because the truth about God, such as reason could discover, would only be known by a few. That's interesting. And that after a long time. These arguments are kind of funny. And with the admixture of many errors. So the idea is reason, we could error in our reason if we didn't know the true God through revelation. And it might take a long time, and maybe very few would know it. That seems true for revelation too, so I don't know the argument there quite. Although I can understand that problem of error, right? If God comes down and reveals himself directly, it makes it more difficult to make mistakes about his nature. Whereas man's whole salvation, which is in God, depends upon the knowledge of this truth. The truth about who God is, I think. The truth about God. So salvation is dependent upon truth, knowing the truth about God. Therefore, in order that the salvation of men might be brought about more fitly and more surely, it was necessary that they should be taught divine truths by divine revelation. It was therefore necessary that besides the philosophical science built up by reason, there should be a sacred science learned through revelation. So that's his final answer on the subject, that to know God, it is necessary to know that he is, and to know correct truths and doctrines about him, so that we can start acting in a way and choosing, making choices, and doing things that will help us to attain our salvation in him. Seems to be his argument. Once again, I think this is mostly an argument for Christians. I don't know how convincing it would be to a non-Christian to read this, but there we are.